everyone knows. The list of lost is ridiculous, and everyone knows Diddy was selected for this job.
What's going on, everyone? Welcome to the Behavioral Lights. My name is Spidey, and I use my degree in sociology and psychology, my certifications in criminal interrogation and body language analysis, and over 10 years' experience as an award-winning mentalist to teach people behavioral analysis and practical psychology on stages and television shows all over the world. In the midst of Diddy's arrest, accusations, and lawsuits, Piers Morgan hosted a pretty controversial interview on his show Uncensored. In this interview, Piers talked to singer-songwriter Jaguar Wright, who for a while now has been making some pretty shocking claims about not just Diddy, but other big players in the music industry. Then, in the same video, Piers talked to YouTube interviewer DJ Vlad, who, to put it lightly, seemed to disagree with Jaguar Wright, or so it would seem. But what do their body language, facial expressions, and word choice reveal? And why is this disagreement between the two of them really interesting? Let's dive right in. Before we look at this interview, just a few quick notes for context. So for those of you who don't know, Jaguar Wright has been speaking up against certain members of the music industry for a while now. The interesting thing about this interview is, if you go watch the full interview now, there are obvious cuts you'll see, these moments where it just jumps. Because in the interview, she talked about Jay-Z and Beyonce, and all those parts were removed. And in the video after this one, Piers Morgan apologized to Jay-Z and Beyonce and said that since they had taken legal action pertaining to those parts, they had to be removed. And I think for context, that's important for your consideration. So here's a clip of Jaguar Wright talking about Diddy.
For those who were never at these freak-off parties, what were they like?
See, this is the thing. Everything that I'm about to say to you is not my firsthand knowledge. It is my firsthand witness account experience. I was a sex worker. I was a dominatrix before I got my record deal. That's how I know how the dark world and the sex world and the entertainment world run hand in hand. That's why the movie Blink Twice is so important. Salute to Zoe Kravitz. The sex workers that I have worked with throughout the years and continue to work with even to this day have worn hidden cameras. I have my own tapes. I've seen what they do. The ritualistic behaviors, the drugging, putting girls in the suitcases, dumping them in alleyways. It's horrifying.
The whole beginning of her answer here starts with her saying that what you're about to hear is my firsthand witness account experience. Then she talks about that experience, her experience in the field, working in this field, and how she knows the things she knows. Now, in interrogations and interviews, we call this type of thing a resume or convincing statement. These are statements that we hear before the answer when someone is trying to build themselves up, whether they're trying to build themselves up in morality, in saying something like, I'm way too honest to do something like that, check my record, I've never even had a parking ticket, or when they're trying to build up their credibility by stating their credentials. In this case, literally a resume statement. She's giving us her work resume, her experience in the field. Now, nothing is absolute in behavior, but when we do hear a resume or convincing statement, typically it indicates that the person wants to add weight to their answer. They want to qualify it in order for you to know that this is coming from someone that you can trust and who has credibility on this topic. Does it always mean the person's being deceptive? No, it can mean that, but it can also come from someone who is scared of not being believed because they face criticism before or because they're telling you something that's really hard to believe. So we might get these resume statements before, like, trust me, I would know this, as hard as this is to believe. Because it's conceivable that there will be some people online saying things like, oh, what does she know? Who is she? How does she have this information? And she's kind of getting ahead of that with this interview and saying, I've been in this field for a very long time. I know the connection between my field and entertainment, and I even have all these people with all this footage. So she's qualifying her credentials in this topic. Let's talk about some body language. Certainly a lot of really interesting stuff happening with her, particularly in a body part that I pay a lot of attention to, and that is the eyebrows, because there's a lot of research on the eyebrows and how much we use them to communicate. In fact, Researchers believe that in the way that we evolved, we gain more mobility in our eyebrows because they're so important for communication. And that's certainly true with her. On the channel, we often talk about how one of the main reasons we see the eyebrows go up conversationally is for emphasis, to emphasize something. And the research shows that very briefly before we get to something important in a conversation, those eyebrows come up. It's a way to tell someone, now this is important. And with her, we certainly see this a lot. Almost any time her voice goes up to really emphasize something, we see those eyebrows go up with it. Very consistent. Now, because this is happening a lot with her, these eyebrow flashes, it's considered part of her baseline, part of the way that she naturally communicates, and it's not going to be as important as it would be for someone who doesn't often eyebrow flash, and then all of a sudden we start seeing those eyebrow flashes. Remember the importance of baseline always. It allows us to analyze someone's individual tells given that person's individual behaviors. Now, as much as eyebrows up is important, eyebrows down is also important. Conversationally, typically, when we see those eyebrows go down, it's usually in one of two categories. The first one is deep thought or trying to access memory or focusing on something, eyebrows go down. And the second one is unpleasant experiences, negative experiences. So whether it's anger, everywhere in the world, eyebrows go down with anger, with disgust as well, eyebrows might go down, or just in general, think of negative experiences. Now, with her, that's certainly the case, both of them. There are moments where she's thinking about something, we're trying to think about her words, we see those eyebrows go down, and there are times where she's angry, and we're gonna see that in some upcoming clips, where she really gets angry, and we see those eyebrows go down as well, in those moments where she's really feisty. But remember the importance of baseline. When her eyebrows go down, there's something really interesting about them. Even when they go down in anger, typically, for most people, the whole eyebrow goes down, or the middle of the eyebrows go down and they're kind of arched downwards like this. So think of the angry emoji that we all recognize as being anger. You'll notice the eyebrows are in a V shape like this. For her, what's really interesting is even when her eyebrows go down, those middle corners remain up. So it's like the whole eyebrow goes down, but that outer corner stays up, and sometimes it almost does like this U shape. So it's really the middle going down. Now, this could be because of the way her makeup is done. This could be because of just the way her face is. This could be because she's had cosmetic procedures. I can't really know why it's doing that. And the reason that's really important to note is because in sadness, everywhere in the world, when human beings are sad, the inner corners of the eyebrows go up and the rest of the eyebrows go down in this outwards curved shape, kind of like this. And this is really difficult to fake. Some people could fake it, but it's not easy. And it indicates sadness pretty much everywhere in the world. So with her, there are times where she's angry or thinking or confused or whatever, and those eyebrows go down, but the eyebrows look like sadness, which is why she often seems like she's speaking from a place of sadness when it's not necessarily that. That's really important to keep in mind with her. With all that said, there's a moment at the end of this when she's talking about this information that she has and what was done to these women. There's a moment where we see the eyebrows of sadness. And it's when she's talking about putting women in suitcases. So there's a lot going on through that sentence. And it starts with actually the universal expression of contempt. As she's saying, putting women in suitcases, as she's saying that really quickly, the right side of her face scrunches to where we see the one line on the right side of her nose a lot more obviously. And we see that right side of the mouth raised to the point where the right eye is closed as she's talking about that. That is a universal expression of contempt, pretty much everywhere in the world, and it's characterized by a scrunching on one side of the face when we look down on something or judge something. But right after suitcases, for a moment, even if her eyebrows aren't down like this and causing that U shape in her eyebrows, which is baseline, after suitcases, her eyebrows are relaxed, and for a very quick second, we see those inner corners just come in like this. And you even see in her face that this is emotionally affecting her. And there's a couple of beats there where we see the contempt, we see that sadness in the eyes, we see a couple of cringes or twitches in her mouth, and some people might look at that and go, oh, that was a quick flash of a smile. It's not. If I pause that moment, really look at her face in this moment. I think most people will recognize that this isn't a moment of joy. It's not a smile. This isn't someone who's overwhelmed with happiness. It's just this quick kind of twitchy smile that happens. And this is something very common with sadness and sympathy. Very often when you're told something that gets you to feel sympathy towards something or someone, just kind of this quick little flash of sadness of like the poor little thing. It's almost our mind trying to bring us up from that sadness or feeling really, really sorry for this thing. And I think most people who experience that or have seen that will recognize it there. Another thing that's happening in that exact moment with the eyebrows, with that quick twitch on the face, is a head tilt, as she's saying, putting girls in suitcases. And her voice is cracking a little, but we see this head tilt. And in social interactions, when we see head tilt, typically it falls into one of two categories. I've been saying that a lot in this video, but it's true. With head tilt, the first category is like skepticism or inquiry or trying to figure something out. When we're curious about something, we get this head tilt. But the second one is sympathy. Very, very commonly, when somebody tells you something sad or something that gets your sympathy, you might go, oh, like this, with the head going sideways. And we think this is rooted in the fact that we expose the neck and we're showing that we're really not a threat here. We're not threatened. This is a soft moment. So in sympathy exchanges, we see this head tilt. Another thing I want you to notice is something that interrogators and interviewers pay a lot of attention to, and it's when we ask a question, we ask ourselves, did the person answer the question, and did they answer the entire question? And in this case, I would say it's in a gray area, like yes and no, because if you think about Piers Morgan's question, it was, for people who don't know, what happens at these freak-off parties? Now, the freak-off parties, this is the title that Diddy gave them, in and of themselves are not the problem. It's what was happening behind the scenes of those parties that was the problem. So Piers is asking, what would happen at these parties? For someone who hasn't been, someone who doesn't know, describe to us what these parties are. So after she goes into that whole resume statement stuff, this is my first-hand witness account experience, she doesn't really talk about the parties in the way that he wanted to know, like what goes on at these parties. She immediately goes for this inside information, this dark stuff that's happening, the camera, hidden camera footage that she has, that they're doing these awful things to these women, and kind of sidesteps that surface question of what happens at these parties. So this is interesting to me. This is somewhere I would want to pry in a little bit more and be like, okay, no, before we get to that, what's happening at these parties? What are you seeing when you're there? Because it seems like she came to this interview with these things that are really, really important for her to say, and she's trying to get to those things. And yes, it's important to talk about those things, but I wonder if in the way that she answered this, there's a hint that she wasn't really that often at these freak-off parties. Maybe she knows people who were, she heard some stuff, and they're gonna talk about that a little bit more, but I'm wondering if she's sidestepping this question that he asked out of a sense of urgency to get to the important stuff, or because she doesn't actually have that much information about the question that he asked. There's no way for me to know the answer to that. In an interrogation, I would hear that sidestep and it would tell me, okay, go in and find out more why I didn't get a full answer to that. Now we're gonna hear more about her relationship with Diddy, then we're gonna hear from DJ Vlad and a very interesting contradiction in what he's saying. But before we do me a huge favor, hit that subscribe button, turn those notifications on for more behavioral analysis and practical psychology content.
How dangerous do you think he is as a person?
I think he's one of the most dangerous people I've ever met. A lot of people have been questioning, well, she doesn't really know him. She has no knowledge of him. She doesn't have a picture with him. I'm smarter than Claudia Jordan. I would never take a picture with the devil. Everyone knew he was the devil. He's been the devil for 30 years. He's been covered and protected by not only Clive Davis, but Lucian Grange. He was selected to be the demon that he is, to keep the culture in line so the industry could continue to rip it for all of its precious jewels. We have too many lost. The list of lost is ridiculous, and everyone knows Diddy was selected for this job.
Okay, so behaviorally here, we're going back to what I was saying earlier. She's very angry in this, through a lot of it, especially there at the end that she's talking about how, he was put there and how this has been going on for long and how everybody knew. We're seeing that tone, first of all. I don't think anybody needs me to tell you that. That tone is in an angry place where she's spitting those words, just getting loud. Another thing you'll notice here is her blink rate. If you compare her blink rate, especially there at the end, to earlier when she was talking about the hidden cameras and the girls in the suitcases and stuff, her blink rate here is very, very high. Blink rate is the number of times we blink in a minute. And there's been a lot of different studies on this that found different results, but more or less the range on average is 14 to 21, more or less. But of course there's baseline. There are people who naturally blink much less. There are people who naturally blink much more. I'm one of those people. I wear hard contact lenses, which dry out a lot, and that causes me to blink a lot more than the average. So we're paying a lot more attention to the fluctuation in someone's blink rate, an individual person's. And for Jaguar Wright, it's interesting because throughout this interview, it fluctuates a lot. There are times where she has a pretty standard blink rate. During the stuff she was talking about with the girls in the suitcases and the hidden camera footage, it actually went down. If you look at her blink rate, she's blinking a lot less often. Now, the research tells us that blink rate goes down when something either really has our attention, and this is something you could look for. When we're really interested in something and it's holding our attention, that blink rate tends to go down. But it also happens when we're lost in the clouds, when we're completely daydreaming. And it's funny because those are almost opposites, right? One is like, you really have my attention. One is like, I'm completely lost. I'm in the clouds. And in both those scenarios, blink rate goes down. In her case, it's likely that when she was talking about the women and experiencing those emotions, that lowered blink rate indicated focus. That's a lot more likely, that she was trying to give this the importance that it deserves. When she's talking about, in this clip that we just looked at, these angry things, and she's getting worked up, we're seeing an increase in blink rate. And the research shows that typically when that blink rate goes up, it's either stress or processing. And processing could be processing information. Like you might notice somebody trying to remember something or process something, you see these blinks go up to almost sometimes where we see those flutters as well. That's also in that same family. But it could also be processing emotion, right? Like before things get heated up, you might see somebody go, you want to say that again? What did you say to me? And we see those blinks go up. So in this moment, it's hard to pinpoint exactly what it is, whether she's processing this emotion or these thoughts, or it's stressing her out, but it's rarely an overwhelmingly positive thing, and that makes sense with this moment of anger that she's getting worked up and that blink rate is increasing. However, beyond the behaviors, there are a few things in this particular clip that are really going to cause divide in the audience. And Jaguar Wright is a very polarizing individual. So first off, she herself brings up the skepticism, right? Piers never asked her, hey, by the way, what do you say to people who say you never knew him or you were never around him? She brings the skepticism up. And again, this could be because she's read it so much that she just wants to address it and put that to bed. But what does she say? She says, people say I don't know him or I've never been around him. And then she goes, I'm smart. So we have this resume statement, this quick resume statement, lifting herself up, and goes, I would never take a picture with the devil. So what she's implying here is that she has been around him. These people are wrong. She's been around him a lot. These people are unjustified in saying she hasn't, but she's never been photographed with him. So that would cause someone to kind of pause and go, okay, hold on a minute. You were okay with partying with the devil, being around the devil, hanging out with the devil, but you draw the line at taking a picture with the devil? That's kind of odd. And even if you don't have a picture with him, why don't we have pictures of you at these events that you went to with other people, not the devil, but why isn't there evidence of you being at these events? So it's a strange thing to say like, oh no, I've definitely been around him, but no, I wouldn't take any pictures with him. It's an interesting statement. While we're on that subject, and this goes a little bit outside of this interview, but it's still very relevant, one of the people that she has very often named in these interviews or these videos where she's outing the industry has been the rapper Rick Ross. She's very often talked about his connection to the darkness of this industry. Yet recently, maybe like 2 weeks ago, on Instagram, she was at an event and she posted pictures on her own account, and there were pictures of her with Rick Ross that she posted. And it didn't seem like this big negative thing where she was confronting him and calling him out. It seemed like a decent vibe. So that's confusing because here you are saying, I would never take a picture with Diddy, that man's the devil. But then here's this other man that you've said a lot of negative things about, and you're fine taking a picture with him. So again, that kind of confuses the audience. And then another thing that's going to be really polarizing for the audience is that now she's gone past evidence-based, tangible things like saying, I saw this, I know this, I have evidence of this. And she's gone into this big story that he's been the devil for 30 years and that he was, trained to be there, to take that place. And this is actually this big network and this big thing. And anybody looking at that and saying that's for sure 100% true or saying that's 100% false is just expressing their opinion. There is no way behaviorally to look at that and know for sure. She has a way of expressing herself. She has a way of getting really extra with certain things and really layering things on. So it's hard to kind of decipher is some of this true? Is all of it true? Is it all just her opinion here or things she may have heard through the grapevine? So it's really hard unless somebody really presses her on it to figure out what's going on. But the point is, regardless of whether it's true or not, this kind of thing tends to split an audience, right? And yes, some of what she said has come to light. We have to remember that, right? Months ago, before there was an arrest on Diddy, she was already talking about a lot of these things. She's been talking about these things for a while. So you can't throw it all away. You have to go, okay, there's some stuff going on here that she might know. And on the other hand, there are things that she's doing that, okay, well, you got this picture of Rick Ross, and then there are certain things that are transforming in her story and becoming bigger as she tells them. So there are the skeptics. And when she says things like that, she causes further divide. Those who believe and connect with her will listen to this and go, oh my God, there's this deep thing and it's all connected. And those who don't connect with her will go, nah, there she goes, just making stuff up again. It's really none of my business which side you choose or which one you think is more likely. All I would ask is, wherever you are, whether you're leaning more this way or that way, examine each statement separately. Say, okay, she sometimes embellishes things, but can there be truth to this? Or I feel that she's always telling the truth or often telling the truth, but is there something I could critically think about here that might indicate, okay, she does embellish a little. So let's try to be balanced about it. That's all I ask. In my experience, it's very rare to find someone who tells nothing but truths or nothing but lies. So let's look at every element critically without the need to decide whether everything she says is true or everything she says is a lie. It's often in the middle.
It seems to have been something that a lot of people knew about, but people were simply too scared to talk about.
Everyone knows. And every person that's sitting there trying to act surprised knows very well. The whole point of this, like Cat Williams said when he sat with Shay Shay earlier this year, the whole point of this is for them in a coordinated effort to pretend like none of it is real for the public's perception. But everyone knows what's going on, and it's been going on for years. It's been going on before Diddy. See, people keep looking at him like he's the Sputnik that came out of nowhere. This is someone who was designed to be what he is. We got to stop making Diddies. And if we're going to do that, then we got to go back. We got to go back to even further, the mentors of these people. Because Diddy was taught how to do what he does systematically, and Clive Davis has been his greatest teacher.
Okay, behaviorally, a lot of the same here, but let's look at the content of what she's saying and something really interesting that she brought up. So as I was watching the interview up until this point, I thought it was really interesting in my head because her cadence and the way she speaks actually in this interview reminded me a lot of Cat Williams when he was talking to Shannon Sharpe on that interview, what was it, a year ago, that went like insanely viral. Because Cat Williams went on the show and came with stories and things that he had experienced and exposed a lot of different things that were happening in the industry. Now the thing with Cat Williams is he's a very intelligent man, he's a stand-up comedian, very accomplished, and he speaks very well. There's very little language falling apart, his vocabulary is great, he speaks at this slow cadence, and he knows how to drive those points home, the way a comedian does. That's a big part of the reason that that interview had the impact that it did and reached a number of people that it did. Now, what's interesting with Jaguar Wright is I've seen her in a lot of different interviews and videos, and that energy kind of fluctuates. There are times where she's speaking clearly and calmly like this, and then there are times where there's a lot more energy or attitude to the way she's communicating. But in this particular interview, there were certain points, and maybe some of you felt it as well, that I felt her cadence, the way she was emphasizing things, breaking down that rhythm, felt very Cat Williams-like. And here, she's bringing him up in an attempt to kind of ally herself with him. Cat went on that interview, spoke a bunch of truths. People couldn't counter the things he was saying. I'm the same. So she's saying, that's why Cat did this, and she's connecting the two of them, trying to put herself in that category of somebody who speaks truths. In terms of likelihood of deception here, she seems very passionate about this, and she very much, in her behavior, seems like she 100% believes this. Now, there's a difference between perceived truth and actual objective factual truth. Does that mean that everything she's talking about is for sure happening? There's no way for me to tell you that. I just look at behaviors to try to determine if this person believes what they're saying. And in this case, with this determination, whether she came to these conclusions herself, whether it was said to her by somebody else, she seems quite convinced that this is actually happening. You know, there's these direct accusations. She's looking right at that camera. We're not seeing enormous clusters of stress or these qualifiers. She's just throwing out these accusations straightforward. Can she be completely making this up just to get views, just to get attention? Totally making this whole thing up, totally making up these names and their connection to it. It's possible. You know, behavior will never tell you 100% what's going on. I'm just saying, given my experience and what I've seen, she seems quite convinced herself of what she's saying right there.
Well, I'm joined now by the host of Vlad TV, DJ Vlad. DJ Vlad, I mean, it's pretty horrifying listening to these testimonies. What did you make of what you just heard?
Well, Jaguar Wright is known to be a conspiracy theorist. I don't really co-sign anything that she says. I've never had her on my show, and I don't have any plans to have her on my show.
You don't believe her?
She's got an album in 20 years, and a lot of this stuff is just stuff she's heard, things she's making up, and so forth. I'm not saying that there aren't serious things that Diddy may have done, but yeah, I can't co-sign anything that Jaguar Wright is saying, if that's your question.
Well, I mean, obviously, since we last spoke, there have now been these charges against Diddy, which are incredibly serious. You didn't think at the time we last spoke that he was likely to face these charges. Are you surprised it's come to this?
I'm not surprised, because I feel that law enforcement in general is reactionary. I think that when you look at high-profile individuals, their arrests, indictments usually come after a documentary, a big TV show, or in Diddy's case, there was this huge lawsuit that Cassie filed that everyone got to see all the details and all the attention that came to it. Some, you know, because we haven't really seen, apart from some of the funny stuff of, oh, there's 1 million bottles of lube that they found there. I'm sorry, 1,000 bottles of lube and so forth. We have yet to really see what the evidence is. And I think once we see the actual evidence, then people will actually formulate an opinion on what's happening right now.
So there are 3 separate things in just that one answer that when I first heard them, they really irked me. And I want you to know before we talk about them that when I came into this analysis, I had zero bias when it comes to DJ Vlad. I barely even knew who he was. It's a name I've heard, but I didn't really know much about his career at all. I've since looked him up. Turns out he has a very successful YouTube channel and a website, and I could congratulate him for that. And I could tell you that what I'm analyzing here is this answer, this behavior. It doesn't speak to his character as a person because I don't know him, but these 3 things really stood out to me. The first one is the fact that he comes in to this interview and immediately attacks the character of the previous guest on this show. He doesn't counter her points, right? He doesn't come in and say, no, hold on, she said this and I would like to offer this as a counter to that, or this can't be true because here's this thing that I know. He immediately discredits her as a person. Then he says, I've never had her on my show and I have no plans to have her on my show, to Piers Morgan, the guy who has her on his show. So look, you can disagree with her, you can dislike her, you cannot believe anything she says. That's fine, there's nothing wrong with that. But when you're acting like, you know, nobody who's respectful would have her on their show, because I certainly wouldn't, you're disrespecting your host who's invited you on their platform. So that was weird, and this whole attack of her character, that was weird. Oh, and by the way, really quick, he also throws in, she hasn't had an album in 20 years. So, again, this is him attempting to discredit the source and attack the character as opposed to the information. What does her releasing music have anything to do with the validity of her information? That's one. Second, he's asked if he's surprised by the charges that were brought on Diddy, because there was a time where he said he didn't think it was going to happen. So he's asked about that, and he goes, he's not surprised because law enforcement tends to be reactionary. Whenever there's a documentary or a TV show, that's what he starts with, right? This isn't that. The whole world saw horrifying footage of Diddy and the treatment of his ex-girlfriend. We've all seen the footage. We've all seen that. That's what started some of this. We also have hundreds of people coming forward with stories. And we have people within the industry who are kind of alluding to this thing that's going on. This is a lot more than a documentary or a TV series. Now, he eventually does talk about Diddy's ex, Cassie. But what does he say? He says this one, in Diddy's case was the result of her lawsuit and some of the details that we saw there. Kind of, not going into the fact that detail is footage that we saw of something tangible and awful. So he's trying to kind of brush it off and minimize it by saying, yeah, you know, these things tend to happen to celebrities after TV shows and documentaries, but he knows, and we're about to hear him acknowledge that he knows, that there's a lot of stuff against Diddy, concrete stuff. The third thing is kind of compounded. So he's saying how we've, so far, besides the funny stuff, which is the 1,000 bottles of lube that they found on Diddy's property, we really haven't seen anything. Now, there's a couple of things about this. First, he's about to go on to talk about pretty shady stuff when it comes to Diddy. Maybe not pertaining to this exact topic, but still very negative behaviors. He's going to talk about that himself in a minute here. So he knows that, you know, it's likely that there's been some criminal activity there. But he's discarding it by saying that we really haven't seen anything in this specific field. But second, this funny stuff, the funny stuff like the 1,000 bottles of lube. They found 1,000 bottles of lube on Diddy's property after he knew that an investigation had started. Like, that's what they found after he had time to get rid of some stuff. Now, let's say you go to a friend's house that we have in common, and you open his linen closet and see 1,000 bottles of lube, right? But we know the guy. We know he's a great guy. We've known him for 15 years. There's 0% to suspect anything. You might tell me about that. We might be confused. We might have a laugh. We might make jokes about it. But this isn't that. This is someone that is being accused of horrific things. This is someone that we've seen footage of treating a woman in a disgusting manner, having 1,000 bottles of lube on their property. That's not funny. That's not funny at all. I don't think it's funny. I think that concept in and of itself can be funny. 1,000 bottles of lube in certain contexts as an idea can be funny. But in this context, I really don't see the humor in it. And the fact that, again, he's trying to minimize it by, you know, the funny stuff like the 1,000 bottles of lube, I don't think it's that funny.
Do you think there's a lot of people in the rap world in particular who are pretty fearful right now of where this may all lead? Is it a bit like the Epstein scandal, do you think?
I don't really think so, because, I mean, ultimately, everyone wanted to go to Diddy's white parties when they were happening. You know, if I got an invite, I would go. But there's a party within a party. There's the actual party where the big celebrities go to, the Howard Sterns and the Leonardo DiCaprios and so forth. You never hear of any of them really being involved in any of this stuff. They go home, you know, at 2, 3 o'clock a.m. And then there's the private parties that seem to involve the sex workers and probably certain types of people that are kind of in an inner circle. No. And we'll see if those names ultimately come out or not. You know, I think that when it comes to a situation like the feds, cooperating is a very big thing.
Okay, so you're aware these things were happening. In his own words here, he's acknowledging that he knew that there were these parties where after certain people left, there were the sex workers and some questionable stuff going on, and he's acknowledging that. So then why did he come into this interview guns blazing on Jaguar Wright and discrediting her entirely? Again, it's not like he came in and said, look, to be fair, this that she's saying, that's happening. We know that was happening, but here's this other stuff that I don't really believe. He came in and tried to discredit her entirely. In fact, he said, this is his words, I can't co-sign anything Jaguar Wright is saying, trying to discredit all of it. There was this tiny little acknowledgement when he said, I'm not saying that there aren't serious things that Diddy may have done, but in essence, it was like, nope, don't believe anything she says. It's maybe possible, but here we have him saying that he has this information. So I thought that was really a strange thing when a lot of what she was talking about was this. I really want to quickly talk about his behaviors because I'm focusing a lot more on what he's saying because it's taking a lot of my attention. You'll see the eyebrows of emphasis. You'll also see shifty eyes a lot as he's talking. He goes up here a little, he looks at the camera a little, he goes up there, he thinks, he focuses, he dances around like this. And I know that a lot of people are going to be tempted to say, look, he's avoiding eye contact at all costs. The problem is, this is baseline. It's not like he started the interview talking like this and now all of a sudden this is happening. It's happening the whole time. And the truth of the matter is, some people are just like this. So again, remember, we're looking for a change. We're not looking for one stagnant thing. And because some people tend to talk like this and they don't make too much eye contact, there isn't anything for me to hold on to. Is it possible that he's being shifty and he's trying to avoid facing Piers? It's possible, but again, it's baseline. And while we're on the subject of shifty eyes and eye contact, there has been a massive study by Samantha Mann where she found that more liars increased eye contact. They looked at the person more. So anyone out there who goes, oh, whenever somebody avoids eye contact, instantly you know they're being deceptive, there's actual research out there that shows that that may not be the case. Everyone's obviously different, but in that study, they found that at the customs, when people were being deceptive, they increased eye contact. And we think it's partially because they wanted to check and see if the deception is working, and also because people know this thing about eye contact and deception, so they purposely tried to increase it. So all this to say, baseline, baseline, baseline.
I mean, what had you heard about Diddy over the years? Obviously, people knew he had parties. They knew he was a big rap star and so on. But the nature of this kind of thing. I mean, I'm asking because when I watched, for example, I met Diddy a couple of times. He was always perfectly charming to me. But I've met a lot of people who are charming and turned out to be monsters. The video that came out of showing him beating up his then girlfriend in a hotel corridor was so shocking that when I watched it, I remember thinking, well, this guy is capable of anything. I mean, a man that would do that, who's that famous, who would do that to a woman in a hotel corridor, public hotel corridor, if he's prepared to be that violent in public, knowing there might be cameras around, he's prepared to do pretty much anything, was my conclusion. I mean, what did you hear about him over the years?
Yeah, I mean, that tape was horrific. And after our interview that we did with Roger Bonds, who I helped to bring onto the show, I did my own interview with Roger Bonds. It was a very in-depth, I think, two-hour interview where he goes into actually witnessing a lot of women that were physically abused by Diddy. I mean, not only Cassie, of course, which you saw multiple times, but Kim Porter. He was on a trip where Kim Porter got her nose broken allegedly by Diddy and flew in a plastic surgeon to fix it. There was a personal chef that Diddy beat up. And so I think that Diddy has a long history of violence towards women, but also of men, because there's also the Steve Stout incident. If you remember that whole situation, he was in a music video with Nas, Hate Me Now, and there was a scene where Diddy was on the cross like Jesus, and I guess he went to Steve Stout afterwards and said that he wants to take that part out. That part wasn't taken out, so Diddy and his entourage show up at Steve Stout's office and they beat him with a champagne bottle.
Okay, a lot there. Let's start with the behaviors. So right in the beginning, when Piers says that he met Diddy and he seemed perfectly charming, we see a confirmation, hear a confirmation from DJ Vlad. He goes, yep. And at the same time, we see an eye block or slow blink, two words for the same thing, where when instead of blinking like this at a normal, speed, we kind of blink slower like this and close the eyes for a moment as we're talking. And we'll talk about what that means in a second because it happens again. Because Piers goes on to say that, after he saw the footage of Diddy with his ex, Cassie, and how horrific that was, and he's talking about that, as Piers is talking about how horrific that was, we see that confirmation from DJ Vlad again with that slow blink, but this time we see two new things. One is a lip retraction. That's when the lips disappear like this inside the mouth. And the second, immediately after that, is a lip lick. He licks his lips. Now, this is not baseline. These aren't behaviors that he's constantly doing, before he answers. You might, because sometimes you see someone before they answer, they lick their lips like this before they answer. It brings more color to the lips, makes them more presentable. This isn't baseline for him. So let's talk about these behaviors, right? Because it's not just one random behavior. You see one random thing, okay, that could just be random. It's happening once, then it's happening again with a couple of other things all at the same time that are not baseline. So let's talk about what these are. The first is the eye block, right? There's a lot of research on this gesture of the closing the eyes. And the research has found that even people who were born blind do this. And it helps us visualize something better. So when you're trying to visualize something, closing those eyes, and a lot of you know this, a lot of you have seen this where someone might go like this because they're trying to retrieve an image. But we also do it to not let an image in. So if somebody says something really tragic or really negative, you go, oh, I'm so sorry to hear that. I don't want to let it in. And maybe partially this is because we're just trying to change our thoughts, think of something else, and that's why this happens. But that's what it is, trying to focus on something or focus away from something. Lip compression or retraction. In fact, any tightness in the lips that suddenly happens in someone that doesn't usually do that is withheld information or disagreement. So you might notice you're saying something in a group of people and someone's just sitting there going, like this. It might be that they're holding something in, but they don't really want to share what's going on in their head. So lip compression, withheld opinion or disagreement. Finally, lip licking. So licking the lips happens when we're stressed or when we're about to present. So it could be seen as a grooming gesture. So when we get self-conscious, we fix ourselves in ways to be more presentable, or stress. When we're stressed, the mouth dries out, and licking the lips corrects that. So when we put them together in this moment, it would appear that as he's talking about these behaviors, we have this eye block, and that could simply be because it's a horrible image. And, again, with analysis, nothing's black or white. Yes, this guy is communicating things in a sketchy way, but it's a huge leap to say that he's a heartless monster, right? So anybody thinking of that footage, there's going to be negative thoughts there. So that could justify the eye block. Lip compression, not so much. So I feel like there's something there to add. There's something to talk about that he's holding back. And I think he's about to clue us in on what that is. And then finally, we have that lip lick. Is it stress? Is it grooming? Because he's about to address this. A lot of this relates to negativity, stress, and withheld opinion. So there's something about that video that he can elaborate on. And I think it's what we get next. And what he does say next, again, goes back to him having this knowledge of all these horrible stories of ways that Diddy has behaved awful, just awful things that I can't even imagine. And here he was doing this interview this whole time, and this just came up now. You came in blaming Jaguar Wright for making things up. I can't take anything of what she says seriously. Then you talked about these allegations and said, yeah, the police tend to get really reactive when there's documentaries or TV shows with this thing about Cassie. Where was all this knowledge then of you going, yeah, look, the guy should answer to what he's done because I've heard some pretty awful things. Why wasn't there an urgency to talk about this? And we're just being casual about this the whole time until now. In an interrogation or interview room, if this was happening, at this point I would say, pardon my confusion, but you're acknowledging these awful behaviors that Diddy has committed. You even told me a few that I wasn't aware of. You're acknowledging that there was some stuff happening with sex workers behind the scenes after some party guests left. Can you explain to me why you've decided to discredit everything Jaguar Wright was saying? Are there some things that she said that you would agree with? And what are those things? So here's where I would try to get him to recant that everything she said was false and try to see, okay, what does he know? Because he knows these things and he wasn't bringing them up before. What else hasn't he brought up that he knows? Okay, so what does it all come down to? We've heard from Jaguar Wright, we've heard from DJ Vlad. What is the conclusion of these two interviews? I actually think that a really great way to sum this up is the third guest that was on that episode that we're not going to analyze, but it's a lawyer by the name of Ariel Mitchell Kidd, and she comes in and in the first kind of minute that she's talking, kind of gives her thoughts on both these other guests. And for Jaguar Wright, she says she needs to lawyer up because she's making some claims that could be seen as liable. And she doesn't say whether she believes this, doesn't believe that. She just says, look, there's a lot of big claims here. She needs to lawyer up. Then when it comes to DJ Vlad, she makes a comment about him being a culture vulture, which is much more her place to comment on than mine. But she also says that it was unfair of him to just come in and just attack Jaguar Wright like that. And she even said, it's okay if you disagree with her, that's fine, you're entitled to that. But, very much the way I felt, the way he just completely discredited her on a show where she was invited as a guest, not so cool.
First with Mrs. Jaguar Wright, she said a lot of things that were very jarring in her explanation of what she saw and had firsthand accounts on. My concern for her, she's saying a lot of things that could be considered libelous. Right. And I would suggest that she contacts an attorney, if only to vet the information she has or purports to have from other victims. I was very concerned about some of the things that she had said in her prior segment. I also want to address Mr. Vlad, who I know to be a culture vulture, who takes from the Black community and doesn't give back and puts artists in situations where then they are indicted by the police, and he's very much so what we call police type investigation in the Black community. And for him to repudiate what Mrs. Wright has said, I thought was completely out of line. He can say he doesn't agree, which is fine, But for him to be someone who constantly uses the Black community and uses them as a means for his platform, I thought that was very inconsiderate and unprofessional.
So what it all comes down to is actually pretty ironic, because you have Jaguar Wright, who is very sensationalized and with all these big stories, some of them that it seems they've been embellished, some of them that seems to be from other people, that she's compiled this. Maybe she was there, maybe she wasn't, maybe she was a little less involved, but she's definitely very passionate and emotional about this. And she's been calling out for a long time. So there seems to be a pit of reality there. And then it's hard to tell how much has been added to that. And then on the other hand, you have DJ Vlad, who seems to be a little bit more cautious and realistic and sticking to the facts, and this is the evidence that we have. And the irony there is that that's typically the way I function as well. I look at evidence, and yes, I look at behavior and I try to piece things together, but I don't tend to over sensationalize and look for that big exciting story. I tend to be really realistic. But in this case, I feel like it's coming at the cost of compassion, because there are times where DJ Vlad is minimizing things, calling things funny, putting the emphasis on wrong things like, documentaries and TV shows, and the police tend to be very reactive. But then it turns out he has all this information that I would have liked to know early on, for him to go, no, look, there's definitely a lot here. You know what I would love? I would love to put Jaguar Wright and DJ Vlad in a room together and have them write out a list of things that they agree on, only things that they both agree on. And during this exercise, I would encourage DJ Vlad to be more forthcoming, and I would encourage Jaguar Wright to be more realistic. Stick to the things that you know for a fact or with extreme high confidence, and come out with a list of things you both agree on. And I would love to look at that list, because I think that they would balance each other out for us to get much more of a sense of what's actually happening. This is obviously a case that's going to keep going, and there's going to be a lot of developments. And let me know, whether it's in the comments of this video or community posts or other videos, what specifically pertaining to this Diddy case you would like analyzed. I thought this was a great interview in terms of behaviors. And let me know what other things that you would like analyzed in this case. Besides that, let me know in the comments what you thought of this, of both interviewers, which way you're leaning on each one, and I will see you on the next one.